This is a raw photo. And what I want people to understand is the difference first between a raw editor and a pixel editor. A raw editor meaning Lightroom. That doesn't mean you have to edit a raw photo. You can edit JPEGs or TIFFs or PSDs or whatever in Lightroom or things like it. Capture One, maybe you're using On1 Raw, something like that. But a raw editor is a non-destructive, kind of a one-layer deep editor. And what it's distinguished by is rather than editing a single file, you can edit a file, you can edit a group of files, you can paste settings across files, because essentially you're in here. You're in here editing a photo and you're in here moving these sliders around and you're changing the photo within a catalog. A raw editor is almost always going to be some kind of a catalog-based system where your edits are not actually changing the photo permanently. They're not actually editing the file. So it can be a raw file, it can be a JPEG, it doesn't matter. Any photos I do or any preset, let's say that I apply to this. If I apply a preset here from Silver, it applies a preset, and then that is where I'm at right now. If I reset over here, if I change a slider, if I reset with a reset preset, however it is I reset, I'm bringing it back to the raw file. But the file on the hard drive never really changed. It was saved within the catalog. It wasn't overwriting the file. In contrast, when I work in a pixel editor, as I call it, something like Photoshop, something like Affinity is also a pixel editor. There's lots of variants of this. Obviously, the most common that most of you have is Photoshop. But regardless of whether you're using something else, a pixel editor is where you're opening one file and then you edit it and there's layers and you tend to have advanced blending effects and tools and blurs and all this kind of stuff. A pixel editor, generally speaking, you can do much more. A raw editor is kind of one layer deep. We have all these sliders, and if we change that slider, right, if I adjust the exposure slider here, it increases the exposure. And then if I adjust it back down, it decreases the exposure. Whereas in a pixel editor like Photoshop, if I apply an exposure up layer, it puts the exposure up, even if I'm doing an adjustment layer. And then if I add another adjustment layer, it's another setting of putting the exposure down. Now you're kind of combining the two. So you have this kind of step-by-step layer vertical process in a pixel editor. Raw editor, you have kind of one developed process. Now I realize in Capture One and some others, there is some degree of layers and you can stack up, but you're still kind of using this one level deep slider-based control. And so even though some raw editors do have some layer control, it's nothing like you have in a true pixel editor like Photoshop, like Affinity or something like that. So where do these come together? Let's not ramble too long. How does this tie together? If I'm in here and I have this image, and let's go back to the raw file. The raw file, this is out of my Sony, it's a bit flat. I could do lots of things, but let's say I'm going for a black and white. So I'm gonna do something like contrast blacks. Okay, it looks great. Let's adjust my exposure a little bit. And it looks great. Maybe I could put vignettes or grains or whatever. Well, okay. But now I say, I want to do something more. And so I'm going to go over into Photoshop. I'm going to click Control or Command E in the case of Lightroom. And if you're using Capture One or something like that, you may have your shortcuts set a little different. Now I have this photo in Photoshop. And all it did is it rendered out what I had here in Lightroom. Okay, so now I'm in Photoshop. Same image, but it's rendered. If you look down at the layers here, see I just have a background layer. All right, so what happens if I start doing things now to this? If I go in here and I run the BlackRoom Master tool, the BlackRoom Master tool is what builds all these layers. It converts to black and white, and it gives us all this control and zones, and it gives us the live map so we can review those tones. That interacts with Lumist. I'm going to be doing another video, by the way, on interacting Lumist with BlackRoom and really mastering tone control using those two side by side as well. But today's video is Lightroom side by side with Photoshop, or in this case, BlackRoom, just so I can automate the process. Everything I'm doing here in BlackRoom and in Lightroom, you could do manually. It's not dependent on using Silver 4 presets or BlackRoom presets, but I'm trying to show you not only how to better use these tools, because most of you that watch my channel use my tools in some form or another, but I'm also trying to help you understand the difference between the raw edit and the pixel edit. Now we're in here and you look and see I have all these layers and I'm building up, and if I run actions within BlackRoom, it's stacking new layers up. I can add curves, I can do all kinds of things. Here's the problem with this process, with taking that image that I made in Lightroom to Photoshop. All I'm really manipulating at this point is the tone. And so you can see I can manipulate the tone, I can add effects, But when I add things like the color filters, they're not doing anything because there's no color information. Of course, if I start adding curves or if I add effects, if I add HDR mods, things like that, they are going to affect the image, and it's going to be great because BlackRoom still works. Somebody messaged me recently and said, well, can I use the Leica monochrome camera with BlackRoom? And as you can see, obviously you can. If you bring a monochrome image into BlackRoom, you can still do a ton of stuff and make really profound edits. More so than you're probably going to be able to do in Lightroom, because you can do more without color channels in a pixel editor like Photoshop. But let's just close this for a minute and go back to Lightroom. Okay, so here's the same image back in Lightroom. What I've done and what I think is best for a workflow is if you're editing in Lightroom and you've got this image, and let's say I've added a preset, maybe I've adjusted exposure, maybe I've tweaked with shadows and highlights and blacks and whites, and I've got a look that I like in Lightroom, but now I want to go into Photoshop. I want to edit more. I want to use BlackRoom in this case. Okay, what am I going to do? Well, the easiest thing to do is to leave the black and white space. So you can see up here right now, in this case, I'm in Adobe Standard Black and White from this preset. I could go back to Adobe Color or Adobe Standard, for example, and it would switch the color space back to color. I've made it easier for silver users. Let's actually undo that. So here we are in our black and white. What you can do is in Silver 4.3, there's actually a mod preset specifically to restore your color information. Now, if you look, let's undo that. Look over here at the settings, and let's apply a different preset that affects a few more things, right? So here's a preset that's affecting all kinds of stuff, the silver skin preset. If I reset, it's gonna zero everything. But if I click this restore color for BlackRoom / Photoshop or Affinity or whatever you're using, right? It's gonna leave my tone information alone, all my curves, my shadow and highlights. It's only gonna reset that color channel information. And why? Because now any gradients that I've done, any vignettes, what this is gonna do, and you can totally do it manually or make your own preset. I've just put this in for our silver users to make it easier. This is gonna reset your color information and your grain, because if you're going to BlackRoom, there's grain tools in there. You can certainly come back into Lightroom and add grain tools, but what this is doing is giving you a clean color image that retains all those tone edits. Now I can Control or Command E and go into BlackRoom, and I have the benefit now of using both Lightroom and Photoshop. And again, this applies if you're using Capture One or Affinity, except for you're not using BlackRoom. You might be using Silver in Capture One, and the 4.3 update has the same preset for Silver in Capture One to restore color information. But obviously, at this time, we don't have BlackRoom for Affinity because Affinity can't do all the same things Photoshop can. Now we're here with the color information, but not the raw photo that's just straight and flat. I've been able to retain the edits I did in Lightroom, the tone edits, and whatever I applied from the Silver presets. So now I'm not wasting the energy. Silver is workflow, right? If we go back to here, I can apply a look to this. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll remove the color information, open in Photoshop, and then undo the preset I just applied here in Lightroom. Why? Because now when I edit in Photoshop and save, I'll have my raw file with my Lightroom black and white edit, and I'll have my PSD or my TIFF file from Photoshop that was exported with my BlackRoom black and white edit. And of course, my raw file will be raw. I can reset it. I can go back to wherever I want. But it actually allows me to see my black and white edit in Lightroom versus my black and white edit in Photoshop. I can come in here and I can say, well, let's do something like Earth Porn and kind of do a dynamic landscape look. Okay, so it's brought all the information that I was using already in Photoshop, in Lightroom, excuse me, and now I can edit it in BlackRoom. And I can go in here, I can say it's a little bit too intense. Let's dial back the sine curve layer, and what else? Let's go here. Let's actually adjust the base mix a little bit. But we have all the control over all these. So any plates that we're using, anything we're adding in Lightroom, let me turn down the ice plate a little bit. The dream plate is pretty good. Honestly, everything's pretty good, but I'm gonna turn down the base mods because it's a little bit too dynamic. I want those whites just a little bit, and I'm gonna go right here. I'm gonna set the master mix of BlackRoom to 100, and I'm gonna do full tonal range, so we have full blacks to full whites in our zones on the map tweak. Okay, so now I have this really nice contrasty black and white. I am going to click up here and merge all of these to one layer which will save me space to save it. And so you can see my BlackRoom edit. Here's what we came from Lightroom. Here's my BlackRoom edit. And I'm going to save that, but not before I just come in here with a burn tool right up here. I'm going to take the burn tool and I'm just going to do a little bit of manual burning and dodging of the midtones, a nice big soft brush here. I'm using the Alt key to control the brush size. I'm just going to burn the upper and side areas just a touch so our focus is really coming into the center of this image. Now I'm going to save it. And this is the beauty of how we can use both. Here is my Photoshop edit right here. You can see it says Edit TIFF right down there at the bottom. And here is my raw edit from Lightroom. Now, obviously I have a lot more contrast. I have a lot more punch in my Photoshop edit. Now that I've edited, I'm going to crop. I usually wait till the very end to crop because I might want to change my mind later. So I'll actually edit the full image and then I'll come back in and crop afterwards. And look at that. We have this nice image and there we are. So what we've done is we did an edit in Silver 4 in Lightroom. And the beauty of this is we can edit our entire session, right? The beauty of the raw edit, coming back to our original topic, the difference between the raw editor and the pixel editor. If I like this, I could say, hey, let's copy my settings. Shift Control C, everything's selected that I want, copy, and now I can copy these over to any group of images. I could copy it to this portrait, I could copy it to other variants of this, I could copy this to anything I wanted. And so the beauty of the raw editor is batch, it's efficiency. I can just flip between one image and the next image in my catalog. I can paste settings, I can mix settings, I can tweak them, I can add presets. The raw editor is better for efficiency and speed, and that's where Silver 4 and really all our preset packs come in, is they make tinkering with all the sliders to get exactly what you want way faster. It's not that you couldn't do things manually, but a preset helps you do it faster. It helps you have more visualizations in a short period of time, and ultimately helps you edit better and know better what's happening with your sliders. I find that when people use presets, they actually start to know Lightroom or Capture One better because they're seeing the sliders move. They start to engage better, I think, with how it works. Let's go Silver Automat on this one. And this is just a portrait image, right? I got a pretty good black and white conversion, but let's do the restore color. You can see it's kind of weird because that preset adjusted white balance and all that kind of stuff. It's leaving all that alone. So it's leaving all the tweaks we did to the color information with the exception of the color channels directly. But any white balance, anything like that is being retained. It's restoring it to neutral color channels. Now I can come into BlackRoom with this street portrait here, and I can come in, run BlackRoom, and it's gonna use all those color channels for all the magic that BlackRoom does, like classic color filters, like the mix intensity. I can turn that up or down to get a different level of result in how it's blending the light. Like, well, let's actually just go in, delete the red 25 filter that I added, and just run the silver screen, which is a nice portrait combo founder effect in BlackRoom. This is running a whole bunch of actions together and allowing me to mix it up. But it's kind of intense, so I'm gonna turn the master mix of everything I've added down to 50, and I'm gonna tweak with my tones a little bit. I'm gonna go into my City Girl curve that was already applied from that and manually bring my blacks down a little bit and my midtones so I have a little bit more of a contrasty image. But you get the idea. I can come in here in Lightroom, edit a photo, edit a batch of photos, edit a wedding, edit a portrait session, and then I can come in and say, oh no, this is my good image, this is my best, this is the one I want to print. I can just do the restore color preset, or you can do this manually, obviously. Bring it into Photoshop here, edit it in BlackRoom, and then when I'm done, I have both side by side. I can have my black and white edit from Lightroom or my color restored version, and I can have my Photoshop edit. So I think the way that I would think of this is two different levels of editing. Lightroom is my initial edit. It's my batch edit. It's where I experiment quickly and instantly with visualizations because I can come in and I can just browse over presets. BlackRoom is fast, but I can't do this. I can't just instantly get all this feedback, mix channels in different ways, and get different looks, different tones, different dynamic ranges, different filmics until I get the feel I want in an image. Lightroom or a raw editor like it in the same kind of genre, like Capture One, is the king when it comes to batch editing and just doing creative things fast. But then when I want to take my best image in and do more, I take it into Photoshop. And in my experience, the best way to take that into Photoshop and really do advanced black and white edits in Photoshop is just restore your color information using the color restorer, restore those channels, open in Photoshop, edit, save it out. Now you got your Photoshop edit, but all the images you've edited around that rapidly and efficiently using presets are still there. I don't take every image into Photoshop. If I'm doing a wedding or a photo session, remember, pixel edit one at a time, slow edits, raw edit, batch editing, fluid workflow, control, quick changes, original files, Photoshop, Affinity, pixel edits, right? You can actually open Camera Raw from within Photoshop. In fact, you can use the presets like silver inside Photoshop, but it's still slower. You're using Camera Raw at that point like a filter. And I hope that I conveyed this and talked about it right. I hope this is useful to you in understanding the differences, not only in when to use Silver 4 and when to use BlackRoom, but also when to use Lightroom and when to use Photoshop, that they're a pixel editor and a raw editor are completely different animals, but both incredibly useful. And you shouldn't choose one. As image makers, you should know both because they're both different kinds of tools. And even though sometimes you might get to relatively the same point, they can give you different levels of refinement as well as the organization factor. All my images are organized within Lightroom or Capture One. That's the raw editor aspect, the catalog aspect that allows us to have more control. But then my finite edits can be fluidly done and seamlessly taken over to Photoshop, to Loomis, to BlackRoom, to Alchemist, edited, saved right back into my catalog in Lightroom, and I know exactly where I need to be. Okay, guys, I hope you found this useful. I'm gonna go for now. I don't want this to go long, but let me know if you have any questions in the comments, shoot me an email, and of course, head over to seimfx.com if you wanna check out the products that we've been talking about today. Thanks all, peace.